I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is 5:31. This is the City Council study session and special focus area. It's August 14th, 2017, and we will start with roll call.
Deputy Mayor Wales.
Here.
Councilmember Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Here.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
Excused.
Councilmember Wagner.
Here.
Okay, well, let's move to our first. Are there any announcements, modifications, reports, or presentations other than what we have listed at this time?
Nothing new to add to the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Then let's go to the Auburn Station Access Improvement Project. And we have a 30-minute presentation.
Good evening.
Good evening.
You probably want us to use this, and we're going to share it, and we're going to be good about projecting for you so that you can hear each of us. So I'm Chelsea Levy with Sound Transit Government Relations, and I've brought with me a few other folks this evening. So you know Sandra Fan, she's presented to you on this project before, the Auburn Station Access Improvements, and then we've brought with us Karen Kitsis. Karen is the new Development Director for South King and Pierce Counties at Sound Transit, and we are transitioning leadership for this project a little bit. Sandra is moving on to another project, and Karen in the interim will be the project director. So we wanted to introduce Karen, and they are going to tag team the presentation this evening. Okay, good. So Sandra, make sure you project.
Okay, it is on though. Okay, so we will recap some of the information that we have presented in the past, because it has been, I think our last presentation was in April, so there's been some time that has passed. Is there a click? Oh no, you can click. Okay, so just a reminder, the purpose of this project is to increase access for all riders to the Auburn Sounder Station. And the available budget for this project is $60 million in 2017 dollars. This is based on the Sound Transit Finance Plan. And what we're going through right now is a planning effort that will help determine the optimal mix of improvements to serve riders trying to access the Sounder Station. We've got two concepts just represented here. It could be, could emphasize a parking structure with some smaller improvements for bicycle, pedestrian bicycle, bus access, or there could be more of an emphasis on the non-motorized access and a lesser focus on the parking that we were considering through this process. As far as the project timeline goes, we have presented this in the past. We began the alternatives development and screening process in at the end of 2016, but really started the stakeholder engagement process in January. I think we came to you probably in the January timeframe to kick off the project. And then we've been working through identification of potential improvements and evaluation of the improvements. And where we are now is in the area shown as mid to late 2017, where we're working towards identification of a preferred alternative. Once a preferred alternative is identified, we will take that alternative or package of improvements through environmental review and preliminary design, and then move into final design and construction, and have assuming a parking structure is what's constructed out of this project, as well as some other improvements. The garage could be open to the public in 2023. If there are some other improvements in there as well, some of those could actually occur earlier. So, and we have been all along working with the city to try to expedite the process. And what this actually assumes is a design, bid, build, project delivery approach, whereas as the project continues to move forward, we will actually determine what the project delivery approach is, and that could also affect the schedule, shorten the time frame. Some information that we presented to you in the past. The mode split for access to the Auburn station, as you see here, the majority of riders do access the station right now by car, 57%. However, that is lower than probably some people would perceive. You'll see that transit is 14% of the mode share. 10% of people arrive by car, but via drop-off. 3% carpool or vanpool. I guess these are all cars also, but 6% bicycle and 9% walk. There's also, you should also note that there are currently 633 dedicated parking spaces for Sounder riders right now. This exhibit shows the origins of the people driving to the park and ride, and this is based on license plate surveys. A couple things to note is that about 75% of the vehicles registered that use the park and ride lot are coming from areas east of the station or registered to locations east of the station. About 59% are outside of Auburn, and then 19% are outside of the Sound Transit District. This is another item that came out of our stakeholder engagement process. What we wanted to do early in the process was identify the project goals and objectives. And you see 4 broad categories that were included in the project goals and objectives. Access, improving access to the transit station, advancing environmental and sustainability goals, coming up with improvements that can be implemented in timely fashion, and also consistency and compatibility with regional and community goals. And these are some goals and objectives that helped inform the criteria that we were going to apply to various improvements that were identified through the process, so in our evaluation. So just a little bit about the non-motorized improvements that were identified through the process. We did, we went through quite a thorough process of coming up with potential non-motorized and transit bus access improvements. We worked with city staff in the technical advisory committee. We also received input from the Transportation Advisory Board and from the general public and open houses. Took all of the input we received as well as input that our team came up with, with information that the team came up with in our own analysis, and came up with a very large list of potential improvements that would improve bike access and also bus access. And we then whittled that down based on information that we received from the city and the work that they've been doing in their non-motorized planning is already, looking at projects that are already in the books and making sure what we were evaluating is consistent or complements the work that the city is doing or is planning to do in the future.
Sandra, is it okay if we interrupt for periodic questions, or do you want us to wait until you're totally done?
Oh, you can interrupt.
Okay, Councilmember Pelosa.
On the shared use path
Yeah.
along F Street Southeast, can you explain the usage there?
I think this actually, so these are just an example of one of the improvements that was just put on the table. We haven't worked out any kind of details about the design. It's just some kind of...
What do you mean by shared?
Shared use means maybe a path that could be used by pedestrians and bicyclists along F Street, but we haven't worked with the city yet to define what that could look like. These are just examples of things, the types of improvements that we felt could actually bring more riders to the station effectively.
You may want to show the west-east streets that border that area.
So, oh, you mean in the diagram?
Yeah, because I can't tell by,
Yeah.
by your chart.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And when we take it out to the general public, we will make
Because
sure that's
we have had quite a bit of street improvements along F Street, and segments of going north and south. So That's why I asked the question.
That makes very good sense. Thank you very much.
Sandra, would the potential priority non-motorized improvements be paid for out of the money that's been allocated for the?
That's the intent.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I appreciate you looking at not just the site, but accessibility and the other structures that'll make it work well, wherever it may be. Thank you.
So these are just generally the types of improvements that rose to the top in our evaluation and increasing the potential for people to access the station via other modes than driving a car. And then you've already seen this as well. I think in our previous presentation, we talked about the 13 sites that had been put on the table through our stakeholder engagement process and how we narrowed that down to 4 top sites. And I'll just briefly remind everybody of the 4 top sites. Site 1 is the existing city surface parking lot. Site 2 is Ace Hardware site. Site 3 is the existing surface park and ride that's west of the station platform. And Site 4 is the Boeing Machinists or Aerospace Machinists Union building. And Karen, oh, well, okay, one more slide. So one piece of information that we've been working on over the last couple of months is to come up with cost estimates for the various garage concepts that we had presented to you last time. So some of the factors that went into our development of cost, which is what has taken a little bit of time over the last couple of months, is looking at the cost for acquiring property. This is in addition to just the cost for constructing the garages themselves, or the garage, and because we wouldn't be constructing multiple garages in the scenarios that we've been evaluating. And then where appropriate, depending on the site, if there was a need for pedestrian bridge or...
Councilmember Wagner.
Is the machinist site number 4, are they a willing seller?
I can't speak to whether they're willing or not, but we did meet with them early on, and they didn't come right out and say,
Okay.
say that they were completely opposed to it. So some other elements are permitting and artwork around the stations. We do assume management and administration in our costs that we're going to share. Some non-motorized improvements, as we talked about in one of the earlier slides. And then a lot of contingencies were applied to our cost estimates because we're at a very early, a very preliminary and conceptual level of design. So I'd say 1% design in the concepts that we've been sharing with you. So the contingencies are quite high in our estimates right now.
So the estimated costs on each one of these 4 sites that you have in your information here include the artwork and include any of the mitigation that we have to do in relationship to non-motorized improvements. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening. What I will try to do is talk through the 4 sites, and some of this information you have seen before, I believe. So we can talk about, summarize that, and then talk about the new element, which is primarily the information related to cost. So the first site, First and B Street parking lot, because of the existing stalls now and needing to replace those on there, we would end up with about 545 net new stalls. This, as far as overall evaluation, didn't have any major environmental concerns, would have reasonable access for passengers to get to the train platform. A couple of things to mention with this site. There is existing on-site development rights for that property until 2020. This site would have potential for higher traffic mitigation, meaning the traffic that would be generated by more cars going to this location could be higher than a couple of the other sites. The estimated cost is approximately $60 million, 16.4. And the overall cost drivers, if you think back to the previous slide where Sandra outlined the cost elements that go into this, it's a fairly constrained site, and then there's right-of-way and development rights, essentially, that would need to be considered as part of the purchase of this property. The next is the Ace Hardware location. This would end up with about 580 stalls altogether. This also would have reasonable access for the passengers to the platform, no major environmental concerns. This compared to the first and also the fourth would have lower potential for needing to mitigate for traffic. The estimated cost is almost $76 million. There would need to be a pedestrian bridge built as part of this project, and that's one of the primary cost differentiators. That was hard for me to say, compared to some of the other sites. Site 3 is the Sound Transit parking lot. This would end up with about 525 net new stalls. This site is extremely constrained. If you go out and take a look at how narrow it is and then think how often in life you see a parking garage that is that narrow, the reason for the cost being higher here is due to that narrow site. We end up having to build more infrastructure per stall than we would for another site. Particularly, we found this with the cost estimate when you think about emergency vehicles, you need to be able to have proper radius to get through. We ended up having less space available for actual stalls. So while it has the best location for passengers because of its proximity to the platforms, it has higher costs due to what I just described. Site 4 is a union of aerospace machinists. It has potential for 550 new stalls. It would also have reasonable access for passengers to the platform. It could be connected to the existing garage structure. There would be, similar to Site 1, likely traffic mitigation that would be needed. This one comes in at about $65.3 million. As I see these very precise numbers, I would remind y'all that, as Sandra described, we're at a fairly low level of design, so we have contingencies built into these cost estimates that are designed to, as the project is more defined, that the cost will also be there, but we just want to make sure that we have a robust enough cost estimate for the projects to represent them accurately to move forward with the selection process. So this might be hard to see the line, but there's a line that goes across that shows the financial plan element that let me start the bit again. The amount that's available within the ST finance plan, which is $60 million, and then you can see how the costs, the individual projects weigh against those, against that line. So on the next slide, it describes the steps forward. At this point, we've done the evaluation, the majority of the evaluation that would be done at this phase, and now we're looking for input, both from council, stakeholders, the community, and a lot of, when looking at this, there is an element of trade-off. If there's a site that's closer to the budget, then more of the infrastructure would then be available. The number of stalls shown here. If a site is further away from the budget, then it's a trade-off between infrastructure that would need to be built, which means a number of stalls that would likely be able to be built as well.
Well, you know, when we look at option 1, it's estimated around $60 million, but it has a higher potential for traffic mitigation to be needed. What impact is that going to have on the $60 million?
That's a great question. So 1 and 4 do, just due to their overall location. The contingencies that I mentioned that are within these projects are robust enough to look at what mitigation may be needed and to handle those that are likely to come out of that process. And that will also be a conversation between, more analysis would be done once the site is selected to look at the actual level of service in a particular location and then understand, based on where the garage would be built, what mitigation is possible and what's the best way to mitigate for it. So next steps. Now that we've gotten more information on the projects and the costs, we are looking for that additional input to help in the decision-making process. So we've got a TAB, or Transportation Advisory Board meeting scheduled for the 23rd of this month. We are looking to have an open house at the platforms so we can talk to passengers as they disembark from the train on the 19th of September. That will help with what is the eventual action, which is identifying the preferred alternative. And when we're talking about identifying the preferred alternative, it's picking the site within the 4 we just talked about. It's not saying it's exactly this configuration, it's not exactly this precise number of stalls. More work will need to be done. Remember, we're at 1% design, but it's identifying which site do we want to carry forward to do that additional engineering to then construct the infrastructure, the non-motorized improvements, and the garage facility. So based on a schedule of getting to the Sound Transit Board, which will make the actual determination of the identifying the preferred alternative, we would be looking to go to have a TAB meeting on September 27th to get a recommendation to bring to council, and then a study session on October 9th with a recommendation on October 16th. And that recommendation would go to the Sound Transit Board. You might want to speak just a little bit, but the Sound Transit takes an action in 2 steps. One is a capital committee recommendation to our full board, and that would happen on November 9th, November 16th. It's a week early for the board meeting due to the Thanksgiving holiday. And if we can keep the schedule, then we will still be within the overall schedule that Sandra described. And that's our presentation.
A couple of questions.
Sure.
With whatever one we hopefully end up with, I can assume that the parking in the garage will be for our patrons for free?
I'll let you do that one.
So today, so you have probably heard, and I think we've talked about it here, that Sound Transit has been evaluating, and Mayor Backus as a board member can speak to this. We've been looking over time at different ways to manage parking, and there's a few different tools that we've been evaluating. One is to look at investments we might make in new technology that would enable riders, when they're still at their house, to look at all of Sound Transit's facilities and determine where along the line there's still parking available and go to that parking first, so they're not going around the garage. For example. 2 is looking to relocate carpools, formal or informal carpools, out of the facilities that are in the highest demand. So we know the King County Metro that organizes carpools, they some of those meetups, those carpool meetups, occur in the most high in demand facilities, but they're not actually riding the transit. We fully support that type of carpooling. It's a really important behavior and it gets cars off the roadway, but those meetups can really happen anywhere. And so we've been working with the local transit agencies to relocate those out of the most high in demand facilities. And then the 3rd tool that we have at hand is parking management through charging for parking. And so Sound Transit has dipped our toe in the paid parking water. We now offer HOV permits or carpool permits for transit riders that can prove that they are regular transit riders at least 3 times a week. They can purchase a carpool permit, and then they have a spot at the station when they carpool together. In the future, by the end of this year, the Sound Transit Board will have more conversations about single occupancy permits, so single drivers that drive to our stations and opportunities for them to purchase parking as well. Beyond that, I can't really say what it will look like. This garage is currently planned to be open and operating in 2023, and I imagine by then there will be some other type of paid parking management system, but I couldn't speak to that because the board hasn't directed staff to pursue that yet.
So there is a possibility that you will have to pay for parking.
There's already the opportunity to pay for parking through the HOV permit program.
And I'm talking about for the single rider or driver. Let's hope they're driving with someone, yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll know more about that by the end of the year when the Sound Transit Board has further discussions about it.
And they have been discussing that option, though?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Baggett.
Just a brief observation from my own personal experience in the existing parking structure. Do something about those speed bumps that are in there. Let me tell you, they will ruin a suspension system on a car going 3 to 5 miles an hour trying to go over those things. I mean, I've got a big truck and I've also got a little car, and that little car, it looks like you're going to launch into orbit when you go up over one of those things. I think they need to lower the hump a little bit. I understand the reason for them, to keep people from speeding and things of that nature, but please, consider something a little bit less than. Thank you.
I want to also thank you for giving, we love having paper copies. And so, don't you, Bill?
Absolutely.
So we want to thank you very much.
I was really happy with their Gantt chart. Right?
You bet.
Yeah, so thank you very, very much.
So I just wanted to underscore for you that we will be looking for some type of indication from the council in October for which direction you'd like to recommend to the Sound Transit Board.
I hope that we have an opportunity to share too, if it gets to the point where we're charging for parking in there for single drivers, that we have a chance to provide input for that too. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
We are going to move on to Roman numeral 3, agenda items for council discussion, and we are going to start with capital project status report.
Good evening. So normally we do this for the special focus area for Public Works and Community Development, but we didn't quite make it in time for the last agenda, so we're here tonight. So in your packet you have an agenda bill with the spreadsheet of the current status of projects. And so going over it really quick in the agenda bill, we have currently about 35 active projects. Total project cost, so that's over multiple years, is about $58 million for those 35 projects. We've got 24 of those currently under construction, 11 in design, and we're expecting to see about 4 more bid before the end of the year. So that's kind of just a big picture overview of the current project status. And then attached in your agenda bill is the capital project status spreadsheet with all of the individual projects with their current status. And after the last time we did this, we added a little bit more detail to each of the construction statuses, hopefully to help answer kind of where the projects were at. Some significant projects going on, of course, the Auburn Way South Corridor safety improvement up in front of the casino, so that's under construction.
Touch upon the page numbers as you go through.
Sure, it's on page 5 of 87 at the very top. So that project, we're currently doing some night work on there this week. Right below that is the 277th Street project. And we're currently working on the culvert across the roadway, so we've actually moved traffic over onto the new pavement. But you're seeing that moving along quite nicely to get to an open road here by about October. Let's see. Going to page 8, we have the M Street Southeast improvements. So that's our road closure over on M Street. So they are on track to get that open by our September 1st deadline. So
Sure, you're making the school district happy and kids happy and residents happy with that.
that is our goal.
Yeah, thank you.
That has been a difficult project. So 22nd I Street Roundabout, also on page 8 there. We just awarded that project last week. So we're going to be starting that construction fairly soon.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Back up on the M Street improvements.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank the police department for a great job of helping the citizens on the thoroughfares, F Street, I Street, etc. Because, you know, people want to get through and they want to take a shortcut. But you guys, I noticed one time there was an older couple and a female police officer was talking to them, and you could tell that the interaction that they were sorry that they were going down this side street because they didn't live there, but the officer seemed very accommodating to them. So keep up the good work, you guys.
Councilmember DeCoursey?
Ingrid, on the 22nd and High Street roundabout during National Night Out, I was asked a question. We currently have a four-way intersection with crosswalks there, and the question was, with a roundabout, how is the pedestrian traffic controlled and maintained?
So, you might recall the presentation we did on 22nd and I Street where we gave you kind of a schematic of what that was going to look like. So it actually happens on each side of the intersection within the splitter island areas as you're approaching that, so that a pedestrian actually crosses one lane of traffic at a time. So they only have to look for traffic from one direction. They can cross, stand in the refuge area within that splitter island on all the different legs, and then cross the other direction.
I think it would be really helpful if we did a Channel 21 presentation on the safety that went into the development of that, because I think that we've also moved the crosswalks back 8 or so feet from the actual intersection too. There's a lot of real engineering that went into that would help answer a number of people's questions who wonder why we did such a significant investment in there, and is it really safer? And when they hear you and the engineering department explain that, it does make a lot of sense. So I don't know how we can get that word out, but I think it would be very helpful if we took the time some way. Councilmember Pelosa.
Also, you and I talked about this before, about the number of accidents. I think that has to be hammered home significantly, because there's still people that come up to me and they say, oh, why are you doing that, you know, and all this, and I keep hammering away at them because of the accidents. And we should, you know, and maybe you could
Yes.
cover a little bit of that now.
Sure. So since 2011, there's been 22 accidents at that intersection. 6 of those accidents have involved bicycles or pedestrians. So it's a fairly high accident location and fairly high for the non-motorized accident issues that happen there. Many of that is due to the multiple lanes in all 4 directions that happen at that intersection. So by going to the roundabout, you're reducing that down to 1 lane in either direction while still maintaining the traffic to get through the intersection in a timely manner.
Councilmember Wagner.
I don't hear very much discussion usually about the severity of accidents when they do happen, that they're much lower when you're going slower. And that's what's happening on, so that's another thing I gotta drive home, is not only there are fewer, they're less serious.
Correct.
Yeah, good point.
Okay.
On page 8 of 87, the M Street improvements, I'm glad to see that we're going to still be working on some of the intersections, the east and west intersections onto, well, that's M Street. I'm looking for the Auburn Way north one. Which page is that? Oh, I'm on the wrong page. Page 6. Because the intersections are pretty rough, but you're not going to complete those until you can adjust the signal poles?
So the intersection at 37th and Auburn Way North, we are still waiting on the signal poles for that one, so there's still some additional work that needs to happen at that intersection.
Thank you. I was glad to see that it wasn't finished. Thank you very much.
Okay, so moving on to page 9 of 87. At the bottom of that, we have the B Street Northwest reconstruction, which they are getting started on that project now, and starting with the sewer work that needs to be done. So we will be working on this project into and probably right up to the wet weather. So we are hoping to get it done, but we will see as we get through that process. The highest risk is that sewer work and how long it's going to take us to actually do that, because it's fairly deep and within some fairly significant groundwater.
Councilmember Wagner.
I don't see the 104th Street wild guess that I asked you for on what's going to happen as we access the new park facility. I think we ought to get it on the matrix, even though we might put TBD on some of the numbers because you haven't designed it yet.
So this is generated from projects that are actually in the budget and are budgeted projects that we're actively working on. That would be actually part of the Lee Hill Road improvements for what we plan to do at 104th, which is in our CFP as well as in our TIP. So it is tracked through that process
When will it show up on here then?
when we actually have money to do construction.
I know, I've received a lot of questions, as we've procured the property around there, and it would be nice if we could have a non-binding conceptual presentation that kind of says what you're thinking about at that intersection of 104th and Porter Bridge Road 8th. Is there any way you could give us a review or?
Yeah,
idea?
it's basically, the planned improvement for that is basically a widening of Lee Hill Road and 8th Street so that you can actually have 5 lanes through that intersection at 104th and 4 lanes going up the hill instead of 1 lane in either direction. So all the properties that have been purchased along that corridor are to preserve the right-of-way so that we don't have them redevelop and create situations where we can't actually do that widening.
Councilmember Wagner.
On our council matrix at the back of this agenda packet, we do say a topic of property at 140th, 104th, and 102nd.
And that was in response to, I believe, the request that you made previously to add that for a future discussion.
Right. Can we expand that to say conceptual design that you and Parks like? Jamie's probably got some ideas of how to meet for the parks.
So, my only concern with that is we are in the middle of a very, very heavy construction season, and I am down some staff. And while we know what we ultimately want to do for a road cross-section, I don't necessarily have exhibits that I can provide that would clearly show those, and I don't think that I will have that done by October 9th, given our current workload.
I don't think you have any
Show us a map
downtime.
and talk about how things might work. You don't have a picture of it for me. Kind of look at the map and say, well, we're gonna probably have parking here, we're gonna be 2 lanes here. That kind of non-binding kind of thing
Yeah.
is what I think council would like to see.
It's nice to hear that you're thinking about 4 lanes up the hill and east and west, or, I need a map, but we're excited about that, and it justifies why we're buying some of that property and that it's sitting there waiting for us to do our next move. And we do get a lot of questions from the Lee Hill people. Also, the traffic up there is, as you know, heavy, slow, and everything else. But when we know there's hope at the end of the rainbow, it helps us kind of hold our breath. So maybe just a whiteboard with a felt pen. But I think you understand what we're asking. We know your time restrictions, and maybe for Christmas you could give it to us as a gift. Thank you. Keep going.
Think conceptual.
Okay, let's see. On page 11 of 87, Lake Taps Parkway Preservation, that project is currently ongoing. Repaving that roadway, that's a grant project.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Page 10. Very top bottom item, CP 1617. Can you tell me where those PRV stations are?
Off the top of my head, I don't know that I can give you exact locations. So there's 2 or 3 that are going up Lee Hill Road. And then there are a couple of others on the top of the hill as well. So it's about 5 different locations. All of them are extremely older PRVs and are at the end of their useful life.
So none of these are on the bluff side?
I would have to look at the map. I don't have their
I'd
exact
like
locations.
to know where they are. I've had a citizen ask me.
Councilmember Wagner.
That same one, Ingrid, with big improvements going on up on the hill, like a big apartment complex. Do any of these things like the PRVs cause those to have to delay their opening?
No, they should not. Because we're not changing anything in how the water system functions up there. We're just improving our ability to maintain the facilities that are there by replacing them with newer PRVs so that we don't have something break down that would actually cause an issue to service on the hill.
What is the purpose of these PRVs?
Pressure reducing valves, so it's where you have higher pressure from...
We've got high pressure up there anyway.
Right. So this is dropping that pressure down and controlling that so that residents don't end up having too high a pressure or too low of pressure.
Turn on your sprinkler system and water your neighbor's home.
Or worse, lose
Yeah.
a fixture.
Or float down the hill.
So on top of page 12 of 87, we have the Auburn Way South dynamic message sign. So that's actually under construction right now on Auburn Way South, just east of the bridge over R Street. So that's basically a permanent variable message sign that will go up there, which will help us with our messaging to that community on the hill next year during the concert season and event seasons.
Councilmember Pelosi.
The last item on that page, 1407, Marchione Meadows.
Marchini Meadows.
Machine Meadows, yeah. So it says that the developer did not complete.
Mhm.
So who's paying for that?
So this is a development project that was done under King County.
Pardon me?
This was a development project done under King County that the city inherited during the annexation. And the city has received funds, which is what we are spending towards the fixes that are necessary at the site from the developer.
So that's why it says developer settlement.
Mhm.
Nice job.
So how much is the city, what percentage is the city paying?
For the improvements that we
The
have
mitigation
done,
of this, yeah.
the city is not paying anything of
Oh,
that
okay.
70,000.
Oh, settlement,
estimated
okay.
cost is-
Developer settlement,
Yeah.
70,000, okay. Thank you.
I think that was all the major items that were on there. So if there's any other specific questions that council had on any projects?
Councilmember Pelosi.
Page 14, last item, 1516 Auburn Municipal Airport. I thought that funding was, we're getting some government other than our funding.
We are, but we are currently, so there's several stages to doing an airport grant through the FAA and through WashDOT. So we are currently waiting to hear from WashDOT on their 5% grant for the design. And we are working with FAA on the federal grant. That's the special meeting that you all had a few weeks ago to allow us to apply for that grant. So that's, paperwork is in process. And then we will actually apply for construction grants from both of those agencies next year. So that needs to be updated on this chart.
So you'll be updating this? Okay.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions?
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Just a comment, Ingrid, I really do appreciate the additional information on the status, and especially when it comes to letting us know when the construction meetings, notices to proceed, and it really does help us get a better understanding of the progression of the project, so appreciate that a lot.
Ingrid, at the intersection of 8th or Porter Bridge and 104th, there are some utility boxes or cable boxes or some structure there that looks like it's been damaged and never repaired. And then off the back side of it are all these wires and other things. And pretty much every day in the evening, there's a Comcast truck there with cones parked. We've done a lot of work of cleaning up the other side of the street. We put a beautiful sign in, a very nice sign, for our golf course. Your utility, or our utility little complex there, is fenced and beautiful. And then there's this.
So that is actually a CenturyLink box.
Okay.
They have been notified of the condition of that. Probably most recently, as early as last week, I believe, we notified them of that.
Okay,
We've notified them of that in the past. The thing to remember with CenturyLink is they are not a direct franchisee of the city, so I do not have as much ability to enforce franchise requirements on CenturyLink as we do with everybody else.
But I would think that there's some real safety problems, not that it's gonna fall apart because they've got it all taped, but on the backside, all those exposed wires that could, you know, interfere with service. And also the constant Comcast truck there every day in that intersection that is crammed full of people and has low visibility. I think it's a nuisance or something that's getting ready to happen.
Yeah, and I can't speak to the Comcast truck that's there.
Okay.
We can talk with them, but again, CenturyLink box, and ultimately it's their responsibility to maintain, and it's their risk and liability for what they have out there if they are not maintaining it.
And so we don't give them an easement and permission.
So again, because they are CenturyLink and they were Ma Bell back before this was a state, they do not have a franchise with us.
Okay.
And so I do not have the direct authority that I do with Comcast or PSE to try to get them to address those issues.
Okay, well, your approach might generate some benefits. Thank you. Councilmember Pelosi.
Page 16, top item, 1709. Whose money is the 175,000?
The $175,000 is a hazard mitigation grant through the state, and it's
State.
potentially federal funding that they receive as well.
State, okay, thanks.
Every time we try to stump you, but it doesn't happen, does it? Thank you
Might
very
one of
much.
these days.
Thank you very much, Ingrid.
Good
Okay.
job. Good report, good report.
Always.
Good reading.
Okay, we're going to move on to item B, Parks Open Space Plan. And we have Director Faber.
And Park Planner Kelly.
Oh, good.
Want to be the operator? Sure. All right. Well, I was requested by Deputy Mayor Wales to do a kind of an update on the Parks Recreation Open Space Plan with really an emphasis on Chapter 5, which is our parks and kind of our undeveloped spaces. So kind of a brief PowerPoint, and then you can answer any questions, or you can forward future questions to me as well. So in front of you, we have the PowerPoint that Jamie's going to pull up, as well as a copy of the Parks Open Space Plan. It's also in your library area, up in your council area as well. But every 6 years we do this, and it has a 6-year plan and a 20-year plan. It's very similar to city comp plans and all the other plans that we do. And it guides our goals and our objectives, our capital improvements, our investments. For the first time that I know of in the city's history, there's actually a deferred maintenance plan in the back of it as well, which I think was really good to contract with somebody who went around with myself and Jamie and Mike Miller to look at all 34 of our park spaces and what will it cost us in 6 years and 20 years to maintain our existing infrastructure. The plan also includes trails, recreation, heritage preservation, arts and events, facility rentals, so it's super comprehensive in that way and kind of guides us in our forward thinking. It was developed through community meetings, obviously, Park Board, Arts Commission, everybody we can talk to, we went out and chatted with about it. The main reason for it is to line us up with the RCO, the Washington Recreation Conservation Office, to get grants. They're in a 2-year cycle with different cycles for whether it's a water access park, such as 104th Street that we can talk about in a minute, or whether it's just a local park. And then also with the federal land water conservation funding, which comes on board every 2 years as well. And so a lot of times I've heard conversations about, you know, park impact fees and mitigation fees. It's really important. For the last 6 or so years, there haven't been very many built up in there. It took us like 6 years to get to $1 million. And now in the last 2 years, thanks to some of the multifamily housing that's happening and some of the new development, we've actually got a substantial amount in there that we'll be able to hopefully match with state and federal dollars to get a lot of bang for our buck on some really great projects that we have coming up. We have 5 properties that we own that aren't developed, which is great because there's a lot of cities out buying expensive land right now, and we've either received them through annexation or through some land swaps, etc. So some of our goals on the first page, obviously serve all of our residents. Great thing about Auburn is we have a diverse group of residents, and I think that they all love our park system. I think they're proud of the system when you see citizen surveys. I think they're pretty happy with what the 77,000 people are using. Provide a mix of active and passive space, super important. High quality parks. We try to have well-maintained parks, I believe, in making those, if you have to kind of brown out your home because of irrigation issues, hopefully our parks, at least the active ones, remain irrigated. The passive ones, we call them golden. We brown those out quite a bit, but our main parks we try to keep respites for the public, Game Farm, Les Gove, Brannan, and obviously where kids are playing sports, we keep those irrigated just for safety reasons.
Councilmember Pelosa?
Yeah, Daryl, are those 5 properties noted in this report or this report?
Yeah, I'll get in just a minute. In fact, I think we have drawings, or
Perfect.
we'll get to that page.
Thank you.
Then trail system, that ranks super high. It seems like our trails are something people are really interested in, and how do they link between schools and neighborhoods, and we have a pretty good trails plan in here as well. So in chapter 5, neighborhood parks, they're basically our parks that are 1 to 5 acres. We try to limit those. We try to also make them to be within about 1/3 of a mile of a resident that you can walk to your neighborhood park. Typically don't have ball fields, typically just more of a place to go with a picnic table, a walking path. A couple of examples are Shaughnessy and Rotary. We'll get to those in a minute. And then community parks obviously are larger parks, 5 acres or more, up to 50 acres at like Game Farm Wilderness. They have athletic fields typically, and they're a little less expensive to maintain on a per acre basis, but they also create revenues because they typically have athletic fields on them, so it balances them out. The map of all of our parks there that you guys have on your thing is also on page 73, and you'll see, honestly, it's pretty amazing the number of parks that we have. And some are as small as, you know, Scooty Brown and Indian Tom, and some are as big as some of our great parks that our community is known for. But you'll notice up on the West Hill, there's where we incorporated relatively recently. We have the West Auburn Lake property, which hasn't been developed, but we're doing some work up there now, and we have a budget amendment coming through later this year to really get it rolling. And that's the one that's going to be named after former Mayor Pete Lewis. And then on the West Hill, we have the Jacobson Tree Farm, which is 40 acres of just prime, Lee Hill, I'm sorry, prime property up there that we're hoping in the next state process to do some matching grants available, and it would be our first real athletic mixed-use park up on the Lee Hill. And there's also a property, Auburndale 1 and Auburndale 2, that's never been developed up there as well. In Lakeland Hills, there's one property, the Lakeland Nature Area, which is the land behind the fire station. It's about, what, 40 acres?
Yeah, 30-some odd
Yeah,
acres.
30 plus acres, but more of a nature park, place to walk through. We haven't developed yet. And then the 104th Street property on the river as well. We can walk through those in just a minute. So Shaughnessy Park is your typical neighborhood park. I've just kind of had that one as an example if you want to click to that. 3.5 acres, mixed use, mix of trees. People aren't using it as a destination. We don't program sports there for Little League. It's just a neighborhood park where neighbors come to. Super popular, pickleball, etc. That would be what I would consider a typical neighborhood park. And Rotary Park as well. Same thing in a different neighborhood up above Game Farm in the community up there. So these parks, a lot of them came to the city 50 to 80 years ago just as dedications of land, such as Dykstra and Gaines. A development comes in, it's have more than 50 homes. Land was required. Great decision by former councils to make sure that neighborhoods had parks in them. And so that's how those came about. The ones up in Lakeland, I've been asked about. Sunset, Lakeland, and Dorothy Bothell are our 3 main parks up there. And a lot of them up there are through their HOAs. So when you see neighborhood meetings or whatever, you're in those smaller neighborhoods and you see a park that might be 5 times as big as this room, those are run by their HOAs. It's not our maintenance crew in there doing those parks. One about a year ago we gave back to an HOA.
North Taps Estates.
Yeah, North Taps Estates, they wanted to maintain. We couldn't do it at the level that they wanted. They'd given more land to the city than required as part of their development, and so it made sense to do a swap and give that back to them.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Do you have a chart, or maybe it's in here, Daryl, that shows those parks where HOAs maintain and then where the city maintains?
No, the only ones in here are city-owned. We don't maintain any HOA parks.
How many HOA parks are there?
Probably if I worked with Dewana in neighborhoods, we could
And
find.
we're talking about those little pocket ones,
Yeah, they're a
too.
playground and sometimes a half a basketball hoop. And we've really, in the last years, tried to not do those, but let the HOAs maintain their neighborhood ones, because people aren't driving from one town to another to use them. Yeah.
How's Lakeland coming on their sprinkler park?
Yeah, that project's not going anywhere right now. We still have city dollars in there. The fundraising arm of it, I haven't heard from them in a while, so I think we're gonna kind of regroup and decide if we're just gonna do that on the city side or just kind of put it on hold.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because there needs to be more neighborhood correspondence, exactly what it should look like.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
This is my favorite park.
Which one? Yeah, Rotary Park, it's a great little neighborhood park.
We're about due to have a project up there, aren't we?
We have some funding to add a walking path around the outside of it. A lot of those neighbors have asked for that. And they like to know if that's an exact half-mile loop so they can
Yeah.
put it in their Fitbit and get fit. So hopefully we can get that project done.
That's also
later this
consistent
year.
with our city wellness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's funding in there for this year.
This year or
actually.
next year,
Yeah, I think a little bit for this year and a little bit for
Did
next
you
year.
have a question, Councilmember Holman?
No, I was agreeing with you.
I was
It's
thinking,
too
okay,
high.
I'm paying attention.
It's a Rotarian, so
Yeah.
you might like that one.
Okay.
Two typical community parks are like Brannan Park. We have 14 of those, and large mixed-use park. We got a Kaboom grant there for new playground and some stuff. And this year, we're gonna be adding one of those soccer little arenas like we have up at Lee Hill Park where the kids, we got a grant from King County for that as well. And so this is a pretty low-income neighborhood, a lot of soccer players. I think it's gonna be a real help in this neighborhood. And we're working with Paul and his group on hopefully one of those photo light things here, because there's some vandalism in this neighborhood. So hopefully we can do one of the blue lights at this park. And then Game Farm, we all know that park really well. We received it from the state quite a while back. Beautiful. Every town that comes and visits me as a parks director, they go out there and say, that's really what a park should look like. It was a great design, and it's still extremely popular.
Daryl, on that park, is there any plan to ever make the river more accessible?
Yeah, there hasn't been, and I've heard a lot of stories. You guys know the stories more than me about how the wall was built and the diversion and all that. So I don't know what options are available there.
It seems like we ought to take a position on one way or the other. Maybe it's too swift a water to even want people down there. But if it isn't, then we ought to say we got a plan to do something.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of riverfront, and a lot of people say, why can't we use that?
I keep wanting to put a zip line across from Game Farm to Game Farm Wilderness to connect the campground, but so far our risk manager
I
just
was
hasn't been
gonna
on
say,
board. But he's not at this meeting, so if you want to make a motion, no. Yeah.
Darryl will be the first one to try it out.
I would, yeah. So on page 156 of the main plan is the 104th Street Green River Project. One I know there's been questions of, and you just had a couple of questions with Ingrid, and we're just starting our park master plan on that with Bob Droll Architects and
What page is that?
156. So that's the riverfront property that we received from the county and the state, and now the city's managing. We've mowed down the blackberries in there and have tried to get in there a lot to clear out some of the homeless encampments, etc. But we're working right now. We'll start the neighborhood planning process and the park board process, and then come to you probably in fall, winter with a proposed master plan for that site. We have a preliminary one that shows a limited number of parking and some beach access. Hoping to keep it quite natural. It's not going to be a busy tennis court park or whatever. There's a lot of land restrictions in there because of setbacks from the river. There's some easements in there, some floodplain issues. But it's a great piece of land, and hopefully it'll be one of our parks that we can actually get people on the water. We've got 2 rivers in town and very limited access. So we'll be looking at that, parking, how do you make it so that summer works, and yet most of the year it's pretty quiet there. So it's going to be a good balancing act, and we've talked to a lot of neighbors out there. Next year is one of the categories for RCO is water access, so this park should score really well. So we hopefully will match some park impact fees with a grant and be able to do a relatively nice project there that doesn't have a lot of maintenance costs, because we hope to keep it pretty natural. And that's kind of the direction we're going on most of our parks, is more natural spaces, because our athletic spaces, we're being able to increase capacity when we can increase synthetic turf and lighting and just get more play on the same land like we did at Game Farm years back.
So if the thrust next year is water access, does that mean that there might be even more activity in relationship to that property that we have on the West Hill that's on the little pond?
Yeah, they're not, the West Auburn Lake property, I don't think we're gonna be applying for a state or federal grant for that. It's too small of a project. I don't think they would consider access to what I would consider a pond.
I don't know. How big is that piece of property?
It's
10
acres,
acres.
about 9 acres and some change, and I
Yeah.
think the pond is 2 acres, I think. Almost
And
2
is it a
acres.
real pond with fresh water coming in, or
Yeah.
is it just surface
It's-
water?
I think it's groundwater fed, and there's really no surface water that feeds it. There's from any direction.
Yeah, so we've got a plan for that, and also some groups working with this Eagle Scout project to build a little footbridge over where the groundwater access is. But that project, we're looking more at the $100,000 level, not where the state's gonna wanna see a grant for 300,000 or 400,000 with a match. It's really one that the locals, we can take care of that one.
When we look at the picture on page 157 of the 104th piece of property, and we have Isaac Evans Park.
Just
Does
downstream.
Isaac Evans Park, who owns the space between Isaac Evan and this park, that swamp?
I think DNR, or is this state, are you talking about on the corner up there where you turn left onto
Yes.
to Green River Road?
Yeah.
It's a state property, yeah.
Sure would be nice to have a walking trail,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I think the Green River Comprehensive Plan has always been to include that in there, but the 104th, section 104th is so narrow
Yeah.
up against the river that presents some challenges too, so.
Yeah.
There's also
yeah.
been talk about like crossing at Dykstra, getting over to the other side and coming up through like surface streets or something,
Yeah.
something like that.
Where the
but-
Dykstra footbridge is, perhaps up surface streets and then crossing back over at 104th, then there's quite a long trail that could take you on the hillside of the green and then cross back over near Fenster.
Yeah.
And really get upriver. And I work hard on King County trails because they've put in trails in every community pretty much but Auburn. And so we really need, I think we were neglected 20 years ago on some trails funding, and but the Sammamish Trail and the Sound to, whatever that one's called, the Sound to Greenway Trail really took precedent in the last 10 years, and it's time for Kent and Auburn to get our portion.
Councilmember Wagner.
Whenever I drive down Lake F Parkway and I see all the people walking that trail, and it comes to mind that this is part of being healthy for Healthy Auburn goal. And it seems like we ought to, as we build more trails, think about more of them that are like that one, that make you get aerobic going up the hill. And so I don't know what I would suggest specifically, but it seems like we're seeing a lot of healthy use of that one. And probably do some other places.
Yeah, I think in our neighborhood planning and also with this transportation division to really think about the walkability of our communities, and even looking in a neighborhood like a Cedar Lanes, where do we have gaps in sidewalks and parks and schools? And somebody could make just a 1 mile loop. Because I think people like to feel safe and walking. It's not always just parks. It's just places.
In Maple Valley or Covington, they have a children's program where you get little plastic cards for every one of the trails or events that you do, and you collect them over the summer. And a lot of parents and daycare providers do that because it ends up being an activity. So as you work on these, we can build some of those kinds of events
And
into our summer program.
we're close to coming to you. We've been working with GIS on each of our trails where you'll be able to click on the website and show that if you're at Brandon Park, you can walk the Reddington Levee to here, and that's what that loop is, and here's where the benches are on that trail. And what I hope through the Healthy Auburn thing is let the doctors use that as a prescription. If they want you to get out and exercise, here's your prescription, it's free. And we've got like 10 really great settings, including the one around Sunset Park and Lake Taps Parkway. If you can walk that trail, that's a healthy walk.
A week ago, Virginia Haugen was talking about, was it called Cedar Lanes?
Yeah.
Which page is that on?
Right, it's on page 84 and 5. So what she was referring to, you want me to address that a second?
Oh, please,
Yeah, what she was
yes.
referring to is about an inch down from where the circle is around the playground.
Yep.
And then there's a kind of a dead grass area. And then below that is, I don't know what that little square is, do you know? Is it the trunk of a tree?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But anyhow, there's a little pinpoint on there about an inch below the playground. To the words about, and there's a low spot in the park there. First off, there's no wetlands in this park. She brought that up in a letter. There's no wetlands. But there's an area there that's kind of low and out of sight. And we've worked a lot with the neighbors around this park, with the police department, on trying to limb up kind of the area that I would say if you were at the playground, there's an inside loop. You can almost see the different color of the trees, where there's an asphalt path through this park that was done by volunteers as part of Clean Sweep maybe 8-10 years ago. And the parents really wanted to be able to see through the park to watch their kids ride their bikes around. And there's a low level in there that we've brought some fill in, some from our other parks, to bring that up just to help the site corridors in the park. And so that's what that project was. And we're also are planting, we're eliminating some non-native understory like blackberries and the like. And we've had groups plant some native plants that succeed without irrigation in that park. So that's what it is. It's a pretty small, it's not even a project. It's just a place where some soils have gone when we replaced, I think it was Regner Park Playground. We put a new playground in. We had to dig some soils out. We put the soils here to bring that up a foot.
Thank you very much.
Clean Sweep project was
It was a
on
clean
there.
sweep project, yeah.
It's really brushy understory too. She was just trying to improve site corridors through there.
And I think it was the Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah, they've been in there a few
They've been in there a
times.
few times as a volunteer project.
And multi-care was there this year.
It's actually it
It's
could
really
be a
cool
really
park.
cool park.
Good size.
It's a perfect size. In the neighborhood I was at, this is one I was at for, who was I with that night? With Councilmember Pelosa for National Night Out. And the neighbors, there's some trouble around the park a little bit here and there, but they love this little park. And we did free programs there this summer, and it's a school district meal scheme. So it's getting a lot more use than it did 10 years ago.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, and then on the very back, I know that council is always concerned about funding, et cetera. So page 261 on is what was our newest thing, where we actually went to every park and did a plan for what will it cost. Don't worry about the millions on here. But it obviously takes a lot of money to keep our parks looking good. We're really happy in our community. I think we've been able to do things like repairs of picnic shelters through our regular budget process. Each year there's a capital line of deferred maintenance of $200,000, which when you look at the breadth of our park system, it's not a lot of money, but we use volunteers, grants, force accounts. We have employees that can do our own irrigation in a lot of places. So our consultant was using real dollars here. If you went out and bid all of these things, that's what it would cost. But we're lucky we're able to use a lot of our own people. And when it says a playground in here for $50,000, a lot of times we land a kaboom grant for that. And so it's pretty daunting. We have an older park system, but some of our older things we try to stay on top of. Let's Go restrooms will be this coming year. And some of those things that really aren't quite up to our standard. But we don't look like Bellevue and Redmond, but we have a great, great system.
So what are
And
the
you should be really
plans
proud
for,
of it.
what are the plans for the 5.5 million that are in the park?
Yeah, so
Park
I'd say majority of that would be used for 104th Street project as a match, not a majority, but a portion of it. The West Auburn Lake, because it has to be something that project and the budget amendment coming is all out of park impact fees. Auburn Jacobson Tree Farm Phase 1, I would say, we did a master plan on that quite a few years ago for 3 phases, but I really think we need to get that's such a great property, and there'd be a way of getting something up on the Lee Hill that's a little more grandiose, and that'll be an expensive project, one that
Oh, I
we'll
think-
definitely want to match with the state.
With having athletic parks and things up there, that, we've got Brandon that's big, and we've got the YMCA that has some, we have others. to get a big development up there
Yeah.
would help spread the wealth around and opportunities, and would be nice up there for Auburn Mountain View and some of, and
Yeah.
maybe Green River and some of those other schools.
And there's, I don't know, you guys would know, 12 to 15,000 people or whatever probably that live up in that area. And you're talking about Auburndale Park, which is really almost undeveloped. It's got a playground and a nature walk. Lee Hill, we stuffed as much as we could on that new park, and it's used to death.
Super. Yeah.
So that area really needs a real
Auburndale
park.
is, how big is the Auburndale 2 site?
They're both 10, aren't they?
Yeah, right
They're both
about
about
10
10
acres.
acres. One's developed and one's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I live, I think, next to the one, the Auburndale 2. Councilmember Wagner.
The Clark property, is that gonna just remain natural? That's on the south side of the
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah, it's in here under open space, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in
Yeah.
open space. It's there's not a lot of opportunities to do anything in there anyways, just because of Orvis Road and the river and all that stuff. I mean, there's really, and we've got, you know, between the White River Trail and Ragnar and Game Farm Wilderness, you know, we're pretty well covered
Pretty
in there.
park rich in
I
there.
think, so.
Mill Pond.
Yeah, Mill Pond's in there too. And what's that, Bowman Creek comes down through there too, and that's a fish stream, so there's really no opportunities for any kind of zoning.
Look at the page 133.
Nope, can't look at that page.
Okay, how about the one before?
133.
132.
Oh, perfect, Game Farm Wilderness.
Now, as I travel, I'm hearing that we have a lot of homeless that are, at least in the summertime, along the river, and during the day they move out, and probably during the night they do too. What are your plans in this area where I think we have a lot of people living?
Yeah, so the majority of those are living upriver, so the next property is owned by Sigali, and then after that, I think is the Muckshoot tribe. And so in fact, I talked to Mark Hancock at Auburn Days this weekend about it. A lot of them are living upriver along the river, and then they're coming down during the day and coming and using our campground restroom and sometimes causing some trouble down there.
Yeah.
So we've cleaned out our area pretty well because most of this now is a disc golf course, and so it's so active that the homeless don't like to be in our area. But they are coming across the fence line where you see on the right there. There's a fence there, but they're able to cut through right at the river because when the river is down, the fence, they just go around it. And up by the group campground where you see the little lawn, they broke through the fence here as well. So it's really hard to manage. Jamie and the CERT group have done a lot of work trying to move them along, point them to services, but most of them are just kind of living off the land upriver from us, and you're just kind of pushing them up the stream. But we're really cognizant of, we have a lot of Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts using our campground and that restroom. And we've sent the police officers out there. They've been great respondents as well. When we know there's a big group out there, we've corresponded back and forth. So it is a concern, but along our portion of the river, I don't think there's much because it's too active. You might know better.
Well, there has been in the past, but I think that the word is out that there's really almost a zero tolerance through that whole section because of the White River Trail and all the kids that go from like R Street to Auburn Riverside. There's a ton of kids that walk that, and we have just, you know, tons of walkers through that whole area and stuff. So we have, I mean, the Game Farm guys, they call me if they see anything in the mornings, and if they do, then we get a hold of CRT, and then we're out there the same day kind of a thing. So we've been really, really proactive about that stretch of trail.
It's hard upriver though. This road, you can drive a four-wheel drive miles up the river. And it's really hard to manage that.
And Officer Adamski he's our tribal officer, and we've been working more closely with him to try and figure out solutions for that area up there. It's like Daryl said. I mean, it's tribal, it's Sigali, it's King County owns some property in there, so there's hundreds, and then it goes into the Coal Creek Springs, and so there's really hundreds of acres up there that you know, cross-jurisdictional, that, you know, we're just trying to figure out how to get a handle on that area upstream of there.
Any other questions? We're good. Yeah, so there's a copy. You can either keep this or give it back to us, or it's also available online. And there's one in your library area.
Thank you.
I have a question on park utilization. Do you guys keep track of utilization by, like, some of these smaller parks out in the areas? I'm not talking about the bigger parks.
No, our park maintenance guys could probably give a good idea, like a Cameron Park that's just sitting out in a neighborhood, you know, way up, what their numbers per day are. We don't have real statistics on that because we're not running an event or an activity there. So like that one has a loop trail around it. They probably have a pretty good idea based on how much litter gets in the garbage cans, et cetera. But we don't keep counts on like just, you know, neighborhood parks. We obviously do on community parks where there's ball fields and how many hours of lit this and that. But
We're talking about, like, the Ballard Park over on the Stuck River.
yeah, so
It's kind of out of the way, and
yeah, how many people go to that one park? I don't know how many families it impacts. I think most of those little ones too, because they're not on, you know, it's like a 2-week mow schedule and probably a super low fertilizer, if any, fertilizer schedule. Our cost at this point, because we own it, is negligible compared to a more active park. Yeah.
Councilmember Wagner.
One way you might want to collect some data is get a wildlife camera and set it out there, you know, and it takes hundreds of pictures every time something goes past it.
Code enforcement did that for a while, and they had some issues with vandalism and things like that. But we've totally considered using like a trail cam type of a deal just to see, like, because even like when we were talking about the area upstream of Game Farm Wilderness, where just to figure out where and when they're coming and going and how many of them and things like that. And even when PD sees a lot of these individuals on camera, they recognize them, you know what I mean, and that sort of thing. So certainly things that we're considering, but there are some challenges just because of the vandalism part of it. If anybody sees a camera out there, they're gonna completely trash it, and that's kind of what code enforcement has come up against. So it's not, you know, we haven't ruled it out, but it's there's some challenges for sure.
Now that we have a little not extra money, because we never have extra money. I know that Rich and I and Wayne Osborne were on the Lescove committee a number of years ago. And we really wanted to see lighting on the walks, and we really, really wanted to see the emergency beacon towers.
So,
And those would be new items and improvements.
yeah, so both of those are coming this fall, winter as part of,
Great.
well, I shouldn't, so from where the restroom is
Yes.
to our new building and then out to the park, that whole crescent will be lighted and have the blue light things on it. We don't have the whole outside of the quarter-mile or half-mile loop as part of this. But that whole section will be lit in a plaza where it'll be, we'll be able to set like hours in the winter of up to 9 p.m. or whatever to get people to go from the library to our building. So that's part of this phase that's coming right now.
I know that up at Sunset Park, they've also would like some lighting up there so that they can have extended hours in Sunset Park.
Like ball field and playground?
I have no idea. It's something for you to
Interesting.
share with your
I would love to put lights on those ball fields, but every time I see all those neighbors, I'm like, I'm not sure those neighbors would like to see it.
Well, I think you're,
Depends how close you are to the park.
And they said lights, and
Yeah.
they'd like extended hours. And we certainly can't have extended hours in a park in the dark.
No, definitely not.
So,
No,
maybe
it'd be
your
good if it was
committee-
a conversation about the playground, is add that to the conversation. One of the disadvantages of Sunset is it's in Pierce County, and we get a lot of money from King County Youth Sports for things like ball field lights,
Yeah.
but they're in the wrong county, so we can never help them. But it would be expansion, so park impact fees would be
would be,
allowable
because
expense.
they belong to us.
Yep.
Councilmember Holman, did you have a question? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, you bet.
Thank you, thank you.
thanks a lot.
Yep.
Good info.
It's really helpful when we hear about these plans, so then when you bring the budget amendments to us, we have had a lot of time to really visualize these positive changes. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, now we are going to move on to the finance, and I'm going to turn it over to Bob and try not to interrupt you and get my deputy mayor hat on.
Just raise your hand.
I will raise my hand or tap you on the shoulder, but it's now your turn.
Well, we have a number of items to discuss for finance and economic development tonight, so I think that Shelley and her team are raring to go here. So Shelley, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. We're here this evening for the council consideration of doing a contract extension on the waste management contract through September 2019. And at the same time, we have an MOU for Republic Services for them to continue services on the North Lee Hill and the Northwest Hill until we have a contract in place to cover the whole city.
Councilmember Wagner.
The waste management folks want to do an extension. Do the Republic want the same? Are they wanting this, the Republic wanting this?
Yes, we've spoken with them, and I think, Joan, you've spoken with them most recently. Is that correct?
Yes, they're on board to continue servicing that area.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you know, at one time we talked about the possibility of negotiating some additional features in the contract of picking up carts, not saying that it's still a problem, but we also discussed the idea of giving passes or chits or something to our homeowners so that they could have large items picked up at other intervals than when we do it now, which is in May and some other time of the year. All of that is on hold, so it would be just the current service that we're getting now. And we also discussed turning the complaints and all of that over to them to answer instead of using Joan's valuable time doing that. So is that all on hold too?
That would be on hold until such a time we would hope to either have a request for services or renegotiate a contract with Waste Management for those types of services. And maybe if you have anything additional, we would put in any additional services at that time that we would like.
And those items that you mentioned are in what we're looking for in our next contract, the one that will cover the whole city. So we are
Okay,
looking
and that's
at
in
those.
2019?
Mhm.
Hey, I can wait 2 years. Okay,
It's
just as
coming.
long as they're still on the table.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that we need to have those. I'm not saying we, because I know we're doing a lot with grocery carts and some other things. I just wanted to know what was on the table, because I really like the idea of having more flexible pickup of the large items that we see, you know, sitting out. Someone puts it out there, a couch for free. It doesn't sit in the rain now, but in the winter, and then it gets soaked, and then nobody wants it, and nobody wants to haul it either. So I'd like to see us continue to look at that.
You've been to my house since my garage sale. I can tell you.
Okay, so you're talking about the bulky item collection.
Yes.
One of the things that we're looking for when we do our request for proposal or whatever we decide to do is to go to that program, but we also are talking with Waste Management about maybe incorporating that currently.
Thank you.
We don't know for sure, but we are talking about it because we
Okay.
would prefer that as well.
Okay, great. I think that it helps us look a little bit better, and it helps, it does. Thank you.
And I think that the customers might like it.
The
better, too.
flexibility, because I don't always clean my house based on what Republic is telling me is going to be when they pick up my garbage. I'm not that organized yet. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns? Claude?
So would we look at going back out for a request for a proposal, well, for services sometime before the expiration of this, or are we going to perhaps wait to the end of the expiration of this?
If we choose to do that, yes, most definitely. We will be
One
doing
of the things
something.
we talked about, and potentially in that request for services, was looking at the right color, right size cans. And I know in my area I have a very large composting and yard waste container that I use the yard waste portion of it twice a year. And the composting takes a few little bags in a 60-gallon or larger, whatever size it is, container. So it'd be nice if we could look at some way where we could right size things during this time period, while we're waiting for the request for services to go out.
So, right now we do offer 3 different sizes of compost carts so that people can adjust as needed for what they're putting out. So you can always give me a call and
I'll have to do that
Like,
because I
help you
think in
with
our
your-
particular area,
Yeah.
we have one size.
okay. And you may be in one of the annexed areas.
Well, we're at the river, so it's,
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I can get a larger compost one?
you can have mine.
And can I get his and then you bill him?
Nice try. Any other questions or concern about the solid waste contract? Okay, we'll move on to the fire relief and pension fund.
I need to pull up my,
Okay.
oh, the keyboard's here. Goodness me. Well, what could we talk about?
Jeopardy tool.
Oh, boy, this is. Then we're going to go to another presentation. I'll have to come back to this.
We'll have to talk to IT about this slow problem.
This is, there we go. Oh, okay.
You're off the hook now.
I can't see it from here. I'm assuming that I'm typing this in correctly. Yeah.
Nice picture. Is that symbolic of the budget?
I have no
One
idea.
stone built on top of,
It's what I get from,
It's not symbolic of the council.
it's whatever Windows gives me. Okay, there's a memorandum in your packet in regards to the fire pension fund. I hope you all had a moment to take a look at it. And of course, I don't have it here, because it must be back here. I was just looking at it. What I want to say is, in this fund in particular, we have a actuarial study done on this fund every 2 years. It's not opening. Find is that the big slide? There we go. Okay, so we have this actuarial study done every 2 years. And the most recent study that was done showed that we have a shortfall in the fund. However, they did not use the revenue from the fire insurance premiums that the city has received over the years from the state. The previous actuarial study had assumed we would receive those revenues, which are about $80,000 a year, through 2024. And given the last legislative session where the legislators pulled this funding and then the governor signed them back in, and in this budget go-around is fully funded for the 2 years in this particular state budget. So do we have them? Do we not have them? But the actuarial study showed we had about I think it's an $800,000 shortfall. I don't have that in front of me, I left it over there, but.
887.
887, right. So I asked them to put together some analysis of what we need to contribute to that to bring it in line in 5 years. And they gave me at 2% and at a 2% return and a 3.5% return. We have a lot of time to fund this. The chart here shows the payouts through the next 40 years. I would recommend that maybe we not take it as aggressive stance as 5 years and maybe look at funding it at maybe half of the $192,000 that's recommended and reduce that by a portion maybe of what we get from the fire insurance premium, which would kind of eliminate that for the next year or two. What are your thoughts on this? And then what's causing this also, oh, there's my sheet that shows, yeah. It showed we're fully funded last time. This time we have the 887 shortfall. And there's the, but what's causing this is how this works. This has to do with firefighters that have retired after 1971. Left one firefighters that retire after 71. If they have a fire pension benefit of $4,000 and say they get what the current contract, the firefighter contract, provides for, and if that contract, whatever position they retired from, has a 3.25% wage increase, then that's how much their fire pension benefit increases by. So in this example, if they have a $4,000 pension benefit and they have a 3.25% increase, that brings it up to $4,130. LEF, DRS, Department of Retirement Services, funds that at $3,500, plus they give them a 2.25% increase for inflation. They increase by inflation, not by the fire contract. So as you can see from this example, if the city's piece or the total fire pension goes up to $4,130, the LEF contribution goes up to $3,579, the city's portion increases from $500 to $551, or it's over a 10% increase. So it's a big deal. And this is this as well as longevity is what's driving this. So I think what I'd like to do is recommend that we put a little bit of money in there for the next couple of years along with the fire insurance premium and just kind of see how we go if we get back up there, how long the state's going to fund this fire insurance premium. I don't want to overfund. If we do overfund the account, we can use those funds for the medical component. We currently are funding the LEF 1 medical out of the general fund. So, do you have any thoughts or questions or opinions on that?
They've got a good deal.
Look at your wells.
I think that I think that it's a good position to take.
You got the same deal, right?
I think it's a good position to take because I'm tired of hearing nationally about how benefits are underfunded. And so we're going to be a little more aggressive, put ourselves on sounder ground. But if we overcommit, we still have the latitude to put it into medical. Yes. So to me, it seems like it's a very wise, we're being wise stewards of money and taking care of a benefit that we've guaranteed people would have, and we need to ask the state to start paying more.
And your recommendation, Shelley, would be to bring this forward at the next council meeting for approval, right?
Well, not this particular one, but this would be in the midterm correction, when we bring the midterm correction. The last one, the waste management contract extension, that we would like to bring forward at the next meeting for council.
Thank you. Any other questions on this one?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Bill, please.
Can you cover the deficiency, $888,000 again?
Okay, that's an actuarial.
How did that occur and over what
Okay.
period of time?
Okay. That occurred right here. See the 741,000, the present value of fire insurance premiums through 2024. Our actuaries took that out when they did this particular study in 2017 because they felt, you know, we didn't know what the state was going to do, and they took the conservative route. So when we removed that funding from the fire insurance premium, it put us not only the removal of this, but also had to do with a change in our experience, which I noted in the memorandum. We had about a 10% change in our experience to the not so good, and it had to do with longevity and higher payouts than expected, i.e. better fire contracts.
And who made this decision then?
And the fire contracts?
Council?
No, this is done
The insurance
by,
company.
oh, the insurance company on the fire premiums, this is the state legislature that does that. It's part of their budget-making process.
So the state legislature made this error?
They didn't make an error, they just,
Underfunded.
no.
Well-
The actuaries prepared this report, and they based their report off of information that was most current. And the legislature, last time around, was not funding this fire insurance premiums to the cities with left one liabilities. But the governor came along after the legislature pulled the funding and signed it back in. So we were funded last year. And this budget that was just put out late June 30th, at the 11th hour, so to speak, that the governor signed in, does have this fire insurance premium money coming to the cities that have left one. So we have it for 2 more years, unless the legislature comes in and does an adjustment next spring and takes it away again like they did last year. So they can give it, but they can take it.
Well, we gotta work on our Senator Fain then, right?
Oh, he's aware of this.
One-
He's very aware of this. We've made him
That's
very
good.
aware.
Because I didn't know by, reading all this stuff, if it was a snafu on the city's part. No, it's a snafu on the state's vision, financial vision.
No.
Okay.
Any other questions on this item? We'll move on to the investment policy. You ready?
This one's fun.
Okay. Am I reading it wrong? Did we have the CAFR update next, or was it?
CAFR update is next.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the.
I'm trying to get into the
Moving right
e-drive
through
for
the
you here,
index.
Kevin.
It's the CAFR.
Yep.
So, okay.
That
Oh,
must
yeah.
be Kevin.
Kevin and I went upstairs and collected some CAFRs from your offices.
Some are personalized, some are very general.
Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, acronym
I
CAFR.
got the wrong book.
Thanks, Kevin. I forgot.
Thank you, sir.
Shall we have ours? Okay.
Share.
So it's under G.
It's under what, yeah.
Show me.
You might be able to see it better than me. We have this little tiny, oh yeah, you can see better over there.
We can see exactly what you're doing.
If I had a neck like a giraffe, I'd be golden.
Yeah.
Let's see
We've never discussed the comprehensive annual financial report with you about, and it's a huge document which Kevin's going to get into and explain to you. And I thought it was time that we at least took a quick purview of it. And so that's what Kevin's going to do here tonight.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. And first of all, start off and just say that this is intended to be informational only. We're not going to take a deep dive into the numbers. One, you're probably going to be thankful for that. Two, you've had more up-to-date information with it first quarter 2017 report. And then later tonight, we're going to take a look at the Q2 activity. So this information to some degree is stale. So really what I'm going to focus on is the structure of the document and hopefully give you a little better sense of how it's put together and where you might find information. So with that, before we get started, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context in terms of the amount of effort as well as the amount of information that rolls up into this 174-page document. As you can see by the chart that's up there, we get into this thing in November, and we really don't finish it up until June. So internally, we're getting ourselves up to speed with any sort of new accounting criteria or reporting requirements that have come down the path. We're starting to have meetings with staff in December and talking about, okay, here are your responsibilities, here are the projected timelines that we'd like to have you get that information done. We're also working throughout the city with the departments and talking about what is our year-end process, when are we going to cut off payroll transactions, when are we going to cut off purchasing transactions. And then in January and February, really get into, okay, we're here, we're going to run one last run of accounts payable and payroll, and then we're going to basically cut it off and start working on these higher level accounting entries so that we can begin to start putting the financial statements together. And with the auditors coming in and a requirement that they need to provide us with our audit opinion by June 30, they're now asking us to provide them those financial statements by about the third week in April. So there is a lot of pressure on us to get to that point where we can hand it off and have reasonable confidence that what we're giving them is correct and accurate. So literally, they are starting that audit at the end of April. And then we're in turn asking them to complete that audit about the middle of June so that we can put it together in this document. We can put an application packet together to submit to the Government Finance Officers Association for award. And we can also make our regulatory filings with EMA, which is the Electronic Municipal Market Access site. So we need to file this report with them if we have any outstanding debt so that any bondholders are able to go out there and see how well the city's doing. That's a lot of information right there. I need a little bit of oxygen. So I'm going to take a look at one more set of numbers, and that's really there's a lot of information that rolls up into this. So we've got almost 5,000 vouchers that get processed that go into 6,800 account codes, and we've got 13,000 payroll payments that we make, as well as almost 290,000 receipts. So there's just a lot of stuff coming together. And you all have a hand in that at every regular council meeting where you're approving those and reviewing those payroll and voucher transactions. So you're, to some degree, a financial statement preparer as well.
We're the driver. We're the driver.
The driver, okay, okay. Okay, so let's take a look at the report. As I've got it listed up there, it's 3 sections. And what I'd like to do, you each have one of these. Maybe we're going to go a little hands-on. And we'll start off with the introductory section. So there's that first big tab. And you're going to see, kind of your traditional table of contents. Your pictures are there.
The good-looking group.
Yes. I think we take the cake right there. There's an organizational chart. And then one I'd like to touch on just a little bit more is this letter of transmitter, which is on page 3. This is correspondence that Shelley prepares that's addressed to the mayor, yourself, as well as the citizens of the city. And basically, it's accepting responsibility for preparing the annual financial report as well as making a statement that, to the best of her knowledge, it's complete and accurate. It also talks a bit about, what the current economic conditions are, as well as what she thinks the future might hold. I keep throwing on you, Shelley, and
crystal
I don't
ball.
mean to do that.
My crystal
Yes,
ball.
yes. And then last, I think the most important piece I draw out there is just noting that this is subject to an annual audit. And so, we're giving you a measure of confidence, knowing that no matter what assertions are contained here, that somebody even independent of us is going to take a look at it and verify the accuracy of that statement.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Is this driven by an RCW?
This isn't driven necessarily by RCW, but rather, and I'll catch it now because I had it a little later in my presentation, but Governmental Accounting Standards Board. It's a body that basically says, City of Auburn, the only discretion you have in this annual report is how you would like this front cover to look. Everything else is prescribed by the GASB.
Well, that cover's nice.
They're worse than
Thank
the
you.
legislature.
I think
Yeah.
frequently we've heard the term GASB used, and I'd be more familiar.
Okay, and then the last piece, and I know you've heard it before, but I think it really does bear repeating. Since 1987, the city has applied for this Certificate of Achievement in Financial Reporting with the major governmental accounting professional association, which is Government Finance Officers Association. And that is quite an accomplishment to get that award every year. There are 192 criteria by which this is reviewed. Fully a third of those, if you don't meet that requirement, you are automatically excluded from that award. So it's quite a deal, and I think that goes off to Shelley, because she's been around here most of the time, and we were going to have some other staff here, but
Yeah, they-
unfortunately they couldn't make it.
Yeah, this isn't a one-person show over there. This is,
No,
there's,
it is a full-on team effort. Okay. When you're dealing with numbers, you gotta add a little bit of buzz in there. So let's go and take a look at the finance section, and really if we look at page 11, here's what I consider one of the most important things. It's the letter from the state auditor. It's their opinion on the financial statements. And again, in 2016, they said, City of Auburn, you have a clean, unqualified audit opinion. So it's essentially, we got an A+ for financial reporting this year. That just continues the tradition that the city is accustomed to. If we go to the next tab, the management discussion and analysis, this section is, I think it's geared more towards the layperson. It's more narrative in nature, very high level, not so numbers oriented. It's a good place for you to take a look at it and see what are some of the significant financial things that are going on. And I'll cut to the chase. Looking on page 11, essentially the city's net position increased during 2016 in relation to 2015. So that's good. And when I talk about net position, it basically means what we own is greater than what we owe. So it's your basic balance sheet, assets minus liabilities. So again, the city is improving in that regard. If we go to the basic financial statements, and on page 33, there's this reference to government-wide financial statements. These are statements at the highest level. So essentially, it's taking every single fund, all 21 that we have.
all the cups.
Yep, all of Shelley's cups is a good way. Black, yellow, orange, green, blue, pink.
Red,
and making one statement out of it. So if we flip to page 35, which is the first government-wide financial statement, you'll notice there are 4 columns, and in those middle 2 columns, columns 2 and 3, we have governmental activities versus business-type activities. So when we talk about government activities, we're talking about the general fund. We're talking about the arterial street fund. When we talk about business-type activities, we're talking about water, sewer, storm. The other thing that I'd like to point out on this statement in particular, you notice in the far left column, and you just scan down and you can see there are a number of note references in parens. What those are is they're directing the user of the financial statement to the notes to the financial statement, so that it's basically saying, hey, while we got this cold hard number here, there's more explanatory information further in the financial statement. So we're going to take a look at 2 in particular. So just a mental note under the assets, almost towards the bottom of the assets, we're going to take a look at the net pension assets. So there's a reference to note 10. And then on the liability side, we're going to look at the net OPEB obligation, which is note 11. I picked a couple of doozies there. We'll come back to that in just a minute. I just wanted to point that one out. If we turn the page to page 36 and 37, here is the other government-wide financial statement. This one's a little peculiar. It doesn't look like anything out in the private sector. This is referred to as the statement of activities. And what this statement is trying to accomplish is to highlight to what degree governmental or business-type activities are paying for themselves. And if we think about it, in the business side, the water, sewer, storm, those are fee-supported, and we want them to be self-supportive. On the government side, there aren't so many fees out there. There are some. We've got parks and rec fees, but the primary purpose is not to be generating resources to pay. It's rather to deliver the services directly. So if, by way of example, if we look at the far left, public safety, so second line down with the numbers, we've got about $32 million worth of expenses. If we roll across to the right, we can see that we really aren't charging much for that service. And if we get into the first column on page 37, you see that public safety doesn't support itself. No surprise. That's exactly where we want it to be. Okay. Let's see. I think what we'll do is go ahead and skip to the notes to the financial statements, which begins on page 55. Again, really the focus here is to kind of let whoever's taking a look at this know what our accounting policies are, and then focus on some of the bigger types of activities, like what are our investments, what are our deposits with financial institutions, what are our pension liabilities, and the like. It will also make note of any sort of legal contingencies that we have, or any significant events that might have occurred after the financial statement ending date, or December 31st. If we scroll back to 2015, 2016, but for 2015 financial reporting, well, in March 23rd of 2016, we refunded a bond issue. That occurred after December 31st of 2015. So we were obligated to make a disclosure as a subsequent event in these notes. So it's really, again, to put things in perspective. If we go to page 65, This is one that I want to point out, and hopefully this isn't going to be, well, this is fund balance.
Oh, it's fund
Yeah.
balance.
Hopefully it isn't going to be too complex, but that bottom table on page 65, we have a lot of discussion about fund balance, and sometimes there's a perception that, well, any fund balance is good fund balance, that we can spend it, but that isn't necessarily the case. And the Governmental Accounting Standards Board has told us, hey, you need to segregate these so that you always have a sense for what is spendable or what you can appropriate for a following year's budget. And just quickly touching on the different categories, the non-spendable, basically that is you cannot spend it. And think about the cemetery endowment. Restricted, you can spend it, but it's for restricted purposes. And if you think about that one, it's externally restricted, such as we issue bonds, we said we're going to issue them for this purpose, we're restricted to using them for that purpose. Committed is something that we internally set. Good example of that is we have the 1% cable or 1% utility tax on cable. We dedicate that for the arterial street program. We have the sales tax on new construction. We dedicate that for the Save Our Streets program. And finally, assigned is nothing more than it's to be used for a specific purpose. And typically, that's going to be essentially our special revenue funds.
Deputy Mayor Wells.
Can we look down on that table on page 65?
Yes.
It says street and fire service mitigation fees. There's like $11 million there. Is that our, what we sometimes call traffic mitigation fees?
So it is our impact fees related to development?
And I know that they are categorical. I do know that. Am I going to be able to find that item someplace else in this book that tells me what that $11 million was spent on?
What it's spent on?
Yes.
No, unfortunately, there isn't a direct correlation between some of these numbers. It would just, so that in and of itself has not been spent. So it was a part of what we had left over at the end, but we can't spend it for anything other than that purpose. So the spending of it will be in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Wagner.
Why doesn't the 1% that we earmark for human services show up in this table?
So let's see here. Is that under the CDBG?
Yes. Well, it's not, I don't think it's in the table. It could be, but the 1%, it's for human services out of the general fund. It goes hand in hand with the CDBG.
Right. It's about equal to the CDBG.
Yeah, and we do that through the budget process, and once it lapses at the end of the year, and I don't think that it's something that we've ever noted as being restricted at the end of the year as the budget lapses, and then it gets reappropriated. We could put that in, be another restriction. But
It's been a policy for a long time.
But it's, when you talk about it being internally restricted, that would be internally restricted. However, we have no code, no resolution. It's just a practice.
You ought to do a resolution.
Well, I think that
Deputy Mayor Wells.
we might want to, but I think that we need to give our human services group under the direction of Dana some time to cogitate on what our basic principles are going to be, if we're going to change them or not, and look at that whole issue. That might be the capstone after we've completed that. Where in here do I find the parks